Hello, I'm Jim Miller. I'm here with Terrence Moore. Reggie Turner is out tonight. The Flip Side starts right now. Welcome to the show. Well, Terrence, in just a couple of weeks, recreational marijuana will be legalized in Maryland.
Yep.
And there's a lot of talk about that. There's a talk about what it will mean. There's a lot of talk about enforcement from a police perspective. There's talk about businesses that are feeling left out as marijuana is legalized. Where do you want to start?
First, information is key. I know there's a lot of information or misinformation that may be out there, or assumptions that are being made because of medicinal marijuana transitioning and the vote going in November, the decision, and then effective July 1st, recreational for adult use is something else we have to be clear of, saying that it's only been approved for adult use.
And that's 21 or older or 18 or older?
That is 21 or older.
Okay. And let's clarify here. You have some bona fides here. You are on, what's the name of the commission you are on?
I'm actually, my commission, as soon as Governor Moore signed recreational marijuana into law, my commission actually absolved.
Okay.
I was on the Medical Marijuana Commission that helped to regulate and put controls in place for medical marijuana and set the foundation for recreational marijuana.
Okay, perfect. So, July 1st?
July 1st, recreational marijuana will be made available. Those dispensaries today that currently provide medicinal marijuana will have the opportunity to apply for the ability to sell recreational marijuana. The difference will be that recreational marijuana will be taxed. I believe the tax rate is at 9%. And medicinal marijuana will stay in place where you have to apply for your card in the process that's in place today. But that will be no tax on that medicinal marijuana, and the allowed dosage will still be allowed, still maybe higher, and your provider will be able to just continue to set that dosage amount for you.
So the dosage, when we talk about dosage, is that for example, we might have a 1 milligram pill versus a 5 milligram pill. Is that what you're talking about in terms of dosage, or are you just talking about I can get 1 pill and you can get 100 pills?
Right. Right now it's about quantity that you can actually purchase. Even though there are dosage and percentages of THC that is in marijuana, I know we kind of have been reading over an article around hemp where there is a higher level of CBD and lower level of THC, and what those qualifiers are as well. But specifically, when a provider signs off that you can have medical marijuana, it's about how many grams of marijuana you can actually consume within, I believe, a 30-day time frame.
Okay, interesting.
Purchase.
So you mentioned that Maryland's existing medical marijuana retailers would be able to pay a fee to upgrade, is that the right term?
Diversify.
Their license to include recreational cannabis. Are there going to be stores or vendors that just do recreational?
Yes, this is going to be a phased approach. I think in evaluating this as a state, we weren't the first. There was a lot of mistakes made by certain states of going too fast. But there were also some mistakes by states that are going too slow, which opened up a gray market where individuals didn't really know whether they were a legal facility or wasn't a legal facility, and it caused some confusion and also some additional harm to the constituents as well.
Now, is it also true, and I believe the answer is yes, but maybe you can provide some clarity on this, is it also true that Joe Consumer can grow a certain amount of marijuana in his home?
Yes, there is a plant limit. I'm not going to speak to exact limits because I'd rather you go to the MMCC website to get those exact details because I don't want to mislead anyone. But yes, as far as the law, you can have your own personal plants in your home and grow them on your property.
Go to Lowe's and get your grow light, right?
Absolutely. And those are the kind of byproducts of concerns that we have. If anybody knows, growing a marijuana, the smell of marijuana is some people appreciate, some people don't. The growing of marijuana can also cause a scent that property owners may disagree with, that may be growing right over the fence in their neighbor's yard, or in some cases in the apartment right next door. So I think those are some of the things that need to be worked out and reviewed. And I believe additional laws will come as controls play out, as we see what the impact will be with recreational marijuana.
From a control perspective, absent the commission that you served on or another similar commission, who controls marijuana in the state of Maryland?
Right now, with this transition, it will be going under alcohol and tobacco. So it will be alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis will be governing over marijuana. That's why our commission had to dissolve, because you can have two commission bodies governing over one entity. So they will be governing over it all.
One of the things that was discussed a lot during this whole debate, and let's be clear, if everyone remembers, this is not something that the legislature brought into play. This is something that every voter in Maryland, if you went to the poll in November, you had an opportunity to thumbs up or thumbs down on recreational marijuana.
Yes.
All of that to say, if you didn't go to the poll, you have no reason to complain. That's another story. There was a lot of talk about social equity and issues about going from the war on drugs to now we're offering both medicinal and recreational marijuana. What can you tell us about that?
There were some obstacles with rolling out medicinal marijuana as well. The original licensing and what kind of access you had to actually apply for those licenses. To start this business, it's like starting any other lucrative business where you need to access the capital, but it's unique that many banks won't fund businesses around cannabis because of it's
Federal
not
law?
federally right. It's not legal federally, which means that money that comes from this may not be protected under FDIC. So banks have to jump through some hoops to actually lend and support those kind of businesses. So instead of doing so, it's been difficult for some people to get access to capital to get access into this kind of market. Originally, minorities were excluded, not purposely, but based on the process, and not enough licenses went out for those minority business owners. So additional licenses were opening up for medicinal marijuana to allow minorities to apply and obtain those licenses. Some of those learnings kind of carried over into recreational marijuana and are being taken into consideration at the phased approach and giving access to minority business owners.
So there's the other side of this, and that is the hemp business.
Yes.
And a lot of these, I won't say a lot, there are more than a few of these hemp businesses that are now pushing back, saying that the legalization of recreational marijuana is essentially going to destroy our business. We'll sell 15% of what we once sold. What's your take on that?
It's unfortunate. 15% because those hemp businesses can now only sell tinctures, which is different from edibles and other forms of CBD products that they were actually providing. And with this regulation put in place, working in the financial institutions for almost 20 years and working in fraud, you put controls in place to protect the customer base. Unfortunately, good actors always get caught up in the net when trying to prevent those bad actors. And I think this is the case. I think absolutely there's some businesses that are going to be harmed, but I also believe there are businesses out there that was using the loophole of CBD to provide services that were outside of the purview of the law. So I really believe that some people will be caught up in that who are doing it the right way, and these stricter controls and laws are going to be put in place in this legislation may impact them, but I also believe that a greater amount of those people who are bad actors will now be preventing from causing harm to the community.
Well, and I read there's an article That was in WBFF in Baltimore. Produced an article, and there were a lot of these business owners that were talking about how this is going to harm and how it came out of nowhere. I mean, it really didn't come out of nowhere.
No.
We knew this was going to be on the. We knew this was going to be on the ballot in November. We knew that just based on other states and how popular medical marijuana has become in Maryland, that there was a pretty good indication that it was going to pass. And I guess the other problem I have, and I welcome your comments on this, isn't the basis of capitalism taking a risk? And as products evolve, as needs evolve, we don't have near as many farriers in America today as we did before automobiles.
Right.
There's a reason for that. And yes, maybe that was a slower transition, but we're not living in a period of slow transition. We do everything right now.
And there's not much new under the sun, right? We've been here before. We've seen prohibition and what the country went through during times of prohibition. So we've seen it with some of the controls that we had to put in place with tobacco, which wasn't regulated initially. So I think we've been here before. We've seen it. We've seen this industry grow over probably more so over the last couple of decades, a little bit more in coming to the less taboo than what we saw it when it was kind of tied into the war on drugs that incarcerated huge proportions of minority communities. And the facts are the facts, and we know it. And now as we move past that, and tons of research have been done to the benefits of marijuana, just the medical benefits of marijuana from people who are suffering through pains and symptoms of cancer, to those dealing with anxiety, for those dealing with insomnia. We've also seen that kind of the indirect impact on areas that have access to marijuana and as an alternate to opioids. And what that would do as well is those kind of steering away from painkillers, which are a gateway into opioid abuse, versus using medicinal marijuana as an alternative. We see it in the sports culture. We've seen it so much that I think we're getting desensitized to the tabooness of it. And when we get to that point, capitalist kind of just takes over. It's in our mindset. How do we make $1 from it? There's benefits to it. There's a need for it. It's supply and demand. And the demand for it is high.
Yeah. You mentioned bad actors. And at the far extreme of the bad actor continuum are the drug dealers from this country and other countries that were peddling marijuana long before it was legal. Yep. Their business is gone now. I find it curious that as their business had dwindled over the last several years, as we've started to legalize pot in more and more states, both medicinally and recreationally, that all of a sudden we see fentanyl and some of these other things. That is an unfortunate example, potentially, in my view, of capitalism. We lost one market, so let's step it up and get to the next one. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a difference in marijuana versus something like fentanyl. I believe marijuana has been ingrained in our culture for so long that it wasn't a drug of extremists, right? We've been commercializing it in movies and music for decades. We have the Cheech and Chong, right, who are known as characters around marijuana. Like we have everything that flashes back to the 60s and the 70s, takes into account the use of marijuana and as a commercial product that is part of our culture. Some of the most sold music of all time is singing about marijuana or makes reference to marijuana as well. So I think that's a lot different between someone trying to make an extra buck by cutting a drug with fentanyl because they want to mass produce it and make even more money from what they're doing already. Yes, I believe possibly there's some bad actors that move from marijuana into selling opioids or heroin or fentanyl, but I think the majority of them haven't stopped. It's still a
So you're thinking that was already a business line for them. They just have increased production on that as the marijuana market has dried up.
it's a side hustle. Like not too many people are getting rich selling marijuana unless you're high end selling tons of it. The majority of people who are selling marijuana are selling it for extra dollars in their pocket. They go to work every day.
Right.
They come home and they sell it in their community. They have access to it and they sell it amongst their circle of influence.
Yeah.
And there's so many people are selling it. And now with it being sold in the stores in your downtown area and in your communities, and now there's trucks that are selling them, food trucks that sell marijuana, just pull up on your block. It's really more competition for you.
Yeah, so their side hustle has gone up in smoke. No pun intended.
It has gone up in smoke, absolutely. And they also are not taxed, so they don't have the overhead.
Well, that's true.
So they can also undercut the price of their competitors.
Yeah.
So it's not going away.
There's a lot more to be said about this topic. I'm anxious to hear as we start getting into some of the judicial pieces of it, because driving while intoxicated certainly includes marijuana. There's issues of distribution. There's issues as we expand as you said, start small and grow. We're going to make mistakes too. Hopefully they're not catastrophic mistakes, but we're going to make mistakes.
And I'll throw human resource issues in there as well. As
Absolutely.
Yep.
And just in terms of how people's rights and mandatory drug tests versus getting stopped alongside of the road. So there's a lot more to talk about here, and I think it's time we bring in some experts to talk to us about it, because I think there's plenty that we can flush out of this topic over the next several months. That said, let's take a break. When we come back, Terrence, you're going to love this one. It didn't take our new governor long. He pulled out the pen. He's vetoed his first bills. We'll talk about that when we return. Stay with us on the Flip Side. Welcome back to the show. Well, Governor Moore has got out the veto pen and got out the veto stamp. Is it a stamp or a pen? Do we know? Maybe it's both.
Probably I don't know.
I don't know. At any rate, he issues legislative session vetoes, and there's actually several of them. And some of them are things that really aren't applicable to Washington County, like the Carroll County Public Facilities Bond. And some other things, but there are some that are rather interesting. So let's take a look at some of those. HB 131, dealing with the unnatural or perverted sexual practice. They wanted to repeal that bill, and the governor has stopped that from being repealed, as I understand it.
I'm reading through this bill, and I would advise anybody to do it as well.
But only if you're over 18.
Please, if you're over 18. There's some interesting and harsh language in here that has to be taken into consideration. And I'll just say this just for entertainment. One part reads, "A person may not take sexual organs of another or an animal in a person's mouth." How difficult is to write that kind of bill? I'm not, I was about to say intimately aware of everything in here, but I would say it's somewhat graphic for a bill, let's say the least. But I'm not sure exactly why. There's no real explanation of what gets vetoed, and I think they called that out as well, that some gets vetoed and some gets kind of the bucks get passed and say, I'm going to let it go into law, I'm just not going to sign it, and kind of taking a neutral standpoint. And I would love to hear some of the explanations around each one of these as well.
Yeah. Second bill is the accessory, what is the bill number here? It is the Accessory Dwelling Unit Policy Task Force, which is HB 239. I really didn't understand a lot about that one.
If I remember correctly, and I know just from real estate standpoint, accessory dwelling is the ability to build a piece of property on your land and then rent it out for profit. I know across the country there's a lot of controversy going on around that, especially as we deal with housing shortages, and if that's something that landowners or homeowners should be allowed to do. And how do you put the controls in place to ensure that they adequately are providing housing to someone they are renting to? So I'm not sure if that ties into it, but I know that was a point of contention around that as well.
Also in the realm of mortgage is HB 371, which is the recreation tax indemnity mortgage exemption threshold amount. And basically what that does, and this is a huge jump, it it alters the threshold amount for certain indemnity mortgage transactions that are exempt from the recordation tax, in other words, where you have to pay tax on it, from less than $3 million to less than $12.5 million. That's pretty significant.
That's a huge bump.
So, yeah, I don't know what that means in terms of, I would assume that would cause lost revenue. I don't know how many, houses that are on the market would fall into that category, but probably more than you would think.
Well, in this current market, probably a lot more than usual.
Well, yeah. And then there's HB 0701, Maryland Community Health Resources Commission and Offices of the Comptroller, Treasurer, and Attorney General, compensation and pay scales of employees. And this authorizes the Maryland Community Health Resources Commission to set the compensation of certain commission employees. So again, I'm not sure, I didn't read through the whole bill there, but I'm not sure exactly what is the concern there, but that would allow them to set a pay scale, which I'm assuming we need to do anyway.
Yep.
Anything from you on that one?
No, again, that's another one that I can see him kind of letting go and not really making a decision either way. And, I know the job of governor is a difficult one. I'm sure it's a lot more difficult when you come into the job without the experience, and it's within your first 90 days that you're passing some of these laws. And I personally want to put my name on some of these things as well, even though I know that people in legislation have probably been fighting for it and are more versed in it. I probably would take a step back and allow some of the things to pass before putting my name or signing my name to it. And I think we talked about the marijuana. One of the big ones as well on here was the ability for police officers to stop when they come to a vehicle and they smell marijuana within the vehicle and use that as an opportunity to search or withhold that person at a traffic stop.
Funny you mentioned that. That is House Bill 1071, Criminal Law and Procedure, Cannabis Fines for Smoking in Public Stops and Searches. The bill prohibits a law enforcement officer from initiating a stop or a search of a person, motor vehicle, or vessel based solely on specified types of cannabis-related evidence and conducting a search of these areas of a motor vehicle or vessel during an investigation of a person solely for driving a motor vehicle while impaired or under the influence of cannabis.
Yep.
Is that similar to what the alcohol rule is? Because I thought if they thought you were drunk, they could search your car.
If they thought you were drunk, if you're impaired and you're showing evidence of being impaired, absolutely. But this is an officer walks up to a vehicle and smells marijuana.
Okay.
And which is difficult because of the potency of marijuana and the scent. It can be in someone's clothes. It could be in your clothes, and you may no longer be under the influence. So there's so many things of you didn't want to put not only the constituents at risk of being pulled over or being criminalized for something, especially when the whole purpose of some of this law and legalizing is to decriminalize it somewhat, to open up another avenue or create that more of a conflict for our police officers when they do pull individuals over as well. So I think it's just a risky area for, when you're drinking, there's a sobriety test. There's you can blow into a device and to tell how much alcohol is in your blood. That doesn't exist for marijuana.
Right.
So, you're kind of rolling the dice and taking a guess, and I can only think about how many times we're going to bottleneck our court system of people protesting against, or you have to prove that that person was under the influence, and it's almost impossible to do.
Our next one is towing or removal of vehicles reclamation hours. Now we're into the Senate bills, and some of the Senate bills are duplicative of the House bills, so I won't recover those.
Right.
But this limits to, at a minimum, from 6 a.m. to midnight, the hours during which a certain person in possession of a vehicle that has been towed or removed is required to provide an opportunity for the vehicle owner or the owner's agent to retake possession of the vehicle. So essentially it's saying that if your vehicle gets towed, you have between this time and this time to get it back. That's it.
And I don't know if it expands that time frame, correct?
It says it limits it, but I don't know what
Okay.
it was previously, so I can't speak to that really.
And I can say myself, when you have your car towed, there's a cost associated with your car being impounded. You got to pay per day on top of whatever fees or reason your car was actually impounded as well. And that cutoff time can be the difference between you paying for 1 day versus 2 days, or having your vehicle to go to your place of employment tomorrow, or having to wait. I think there's some impact there as well. But again, I don't know the exact details of that. Something probably most of us probably aren't even aware of, that it's already into law, and we won't find out unless we find out the hard way.
Well, and the reality is in Washington County, I suspect there are a lot less of the population that has had their vehicle towed versus, Germantown or DC or Baltimore or wherever.
Yeah, I'm a New Yorker. It's happened to me, in the middle of the night. In New York, there's a limit of tickets. Once you get over a threshold of tickets, they come in the middle of the night and they'll scoop up your car and take it off into the impound, whether the tickets are legitimate or not. If you're on the list, or they put a boot on your car right in your on your street. So I don't think it's going to impact this region as heavily, but who knows?
Interesting.
We are getting a stadium, and a lot more vehicles will be coming into town.
We hope there'll be a lot more vehicles coming into town.
Yes.
SB 610, primary and secondary education, virtual education, requires a teacher preparation program to include training related to teaching in a virtual learning environment as a component of instruction. That one surprises me.
Yeah, I think that there's also a big initiative and money funding the ability, and part of Blueprint as well, of how we recruit and create a greater access for individuals and teachers to stay in the educational system. And I think this kind of goes in line with some of that as well. We need to recruit and retain our talent, and we got to find ways to do it, and it's not always about the dollars and the cents.
It isn't. And virtual learning is here, and we're going to have it, whether it is something that we do every day or whether it's something, if my child is sick and the choice is they attend their classes virtually or they don't attend their classes at all, if they're well enough to attend their classes virtually, that's a great thing, in my view.
Yep, I agree.
Probably not a great thing for them. Snow days.
But it also qualifies our teachers to be able to be properly trained
to
teach
deal
in
with that.
Teach in that
exactly, because
environment.
it is a different environment.
Absolutely.
For sure.
It is.
And it requires a different skill set. Okay, that's the majority of the bills that are of interest. One of the things, and I think you alluded to this earlier, it looks like Governor Moore took what I'm going to call a play from the Larry Hogan playbook and let some of these go through, some of these bills go through and become law, though he didn't sign them. I don't think any of these on this list, because clearly these are vetoed.
Right.
But there's others that probably if he had his druthers, he would have vetoed them, but he didn't. He let them become law.
Right.
Which frankly I think is it's a way to get your point across without just wholesale vetoing a bill.
And he's been a proponent of supporting cannabis, and he let that one go through without signing as well.
Right.
Yep.
So, yeah, interesting. So I'll be looking forward to next cycle, see what happens. All right, up next, education bills that prioritize teacher shortages and blueprint funding. We'll have that story when we come back. Stay with us. So we have education bills this term, and those education bills prioritize teacher shortages and blueprint funding. We know that that attracting and retaining talent is an issue for many industries. It's not surprising to me that the education industry and teachers are among those where it is problematic. Especially, I would suspect in a county like ours that's probably not at the top of the pay scale when you look across the state at Maryland.
We just had a conversation here recently about educators looking for additional funding from the county, and it kind of ties into some of the funding that's going to be coming from the state to support that. With Blueprint, which we've been talking about, I think we're adjusting to with this first year, which was a future school reform plan that was passed in 2021, and former Governor Hogan vetoed it, and he was overwritten. In contrast, we watched Governor Moore come into office and immediately allocate $500 million on top of the required amount of funding for a total of $900 million in excess dollars. That's some huge funding to be thrown towards education, and stands behind his campaign promises. I'll give him that as well, to prioritize access to good education. I personally believe it's the best investment we can make. I think there's so many downstream benefits to funding education appropriately, and from economic benefits to even culture and recruiting some of the best businesses into the state of Maryland, into different counties as well. So I think it's a worthwhile investment.
It is. Interestingly, there were about 100 bills that the governor signed the day after the session adjourned. Only one of those was related to education, and it was the one that allowed students to consume alcoholic beverages for educational purposes. So if you were going to a trade school where you were learning to cook or whatever the case may be, you could consume alcohol as a part of that process. So the teacher shortages are real.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that's something that's going to fix itself overnight. The pandemic, from my perspective as a parent that talked to these teachers from time to time, had a huge effect on the teachers. They're tired. They had to reinvent themselves, and that wasn't, number one, there was no blueprint for that.
Right.
They were doing it on the fly, and they had to reinvent all their curriculum, and they had to try to keep their students motivated and involved. And unfortunately, it didn't always work. Having nothing to do with the efforts that the teachers put into it, it was a new world, and we weren't ready for it.
Yeah, I come from a family of educators, and I'm very close to a number of people who give their lives to the service of educating the youth. Even myself growing up, I remember when new teachers used to come in, that there was a community amongst the teachers where those with tenure and seniority would come into the class at times and help with difficult situations. It was somewhat of a mentorship that happened organically, of kind of the passing of the torch of welcoming and bringing in new teachers. And when you think about what the pandemic did, where you had a lot of that tenure experience burnout or decide to just retire. So you had a young group that were coming out of college or getting ready to come into teaching after being educated throughout a pandemic. One of the major things about education is doing class hours, some of those things that had to be foregone because they weren't in class, but you still needed teachers. So that community and culture probably was missing as well. So you had a lot of teachers, and I've heard the stories that were weeks or months into their teaching career and decided it wasn't for me because it wasn't the optimal or a normalized teaching environment, especially dealing with the trauma of the students of a class of 20 to 30 students, as well as the trauma yourself coming into a completely new environment and something you once had a passion for, completely and abruptly being turned away from and turned off from and looking for a new career.
Well, and you know, there's any number of reasons why that is the case, but one, excuse me, obvious reason is you have perhaps some of the older teachers that were just unwilling to deal with the paradigm shift to the technology model.
Agreed.
I mean, they just are. You have for the entire period of COVID, a year or better, you have bus drivers, paraprofessionals, cafeteria workers, and others that were displaced entirely, and probably went and found other employment.
Yeah, and it was an imbalance as well. Remember the ups and downs, and when do we start? When do we go back home? You know, who comes to class? Who's not in class? You know, there was so much unprecedented, and there was a lack of consistency. And we always say that the youth benefit from consistency and stability. We had none of that, even trying to return the kids back to school. And that directly fell on, you know, our educators. And on top of that, how many of those educators had children of their own that were also dealing as parents and what their children were? And if you had a child that wasn't able to go back to school, you had to deal with your child still being at home.
100%.
So I think it was just a lot and a huge, unfortunate burden to put on educators, and they're still reeling from it. We still see the impact of some of the trauma in our students. We see school violence is up dramatically as well and drastically. So to put that on someone who went into a profession that isn't paid adequately for what you actually have to deal with, and then to see that go to the point where it's at today, it's difficult. As an educator, you know, it is definitely a passion job. It's borderline community service at times.
It absolutely is.
So, you know, and we've seen so many parents celebrate, oh my goodness, I appreciate my teachers so much. I appreciate what you do for my students, because now the kids were at home with them and they had to help educate them during the pandemic. And all that compassion and empathy seemed to dry up fairly quickly when it's time to kind of start speaking about how do we fund our teachers and how we recruit and retain them.
Well, and the reality is, in the bill we talked about earlier about the education for a virtual classroom, one of the things that I saw talked about a lot as I was researching this topic is that there is, not just in Maryland, but nationwide, there's a significant parity problem between physical schools and virtual classrooms. Because again, we just weren't ready for it, and it's not something you can just, that's not a paradigm shift you can take in a day or a week or a month or even a decade.
We weren't ready for it, but we were aware of it. You know, I studied it in human resource in college. We deal it with adults and businesses. So we understand that there's learning styles. We understand that people learn differently, and we've known it for decades.
We did, but we were forced into a situation, and school is as much about, for you talk about learning styles, for some portion of the population, school is as much about the social aspects as it is the educational, and they feed off of each other. Doing the chemistry project with your lab partner, or going to the high school football game, or in Reggie's case, the volleyball game. That's all part of it. And when you lose that part, it's just then the work part.
But we assume it's all or nothing. I think there's an opportunity to learn in a virtual environment and partake in extracurricular activities that feed that social environment. And if socializing our children is so important, why do we keep defunding youth sports?
Well,
and the arts? So the first things we cut. So we kind of, it doesn't balance out. So we say one thing, but we do another whenever it benefits the budget.
Yep. All right. Well, we shall see. There's a lot of work to be done in education. And again, we're going to get some experts in here to talk to us about their take on it here in Washington County. Up next, Fast Five, stay with us. We'll be back after these commercial messages. Five topics, 5 minutes, well, sometimes. This is Fast Five. Let's get started. Blue crabs are doing better than last year, but still below average. Does that mean we're going to be able to buy a bushel of crabs for less than $300?
No.
Okay, just checking.
Price is not going down anytime soon,
Okay,
especially
well,
how
you know.
Marylanders love their crabs. So it's
Are
good
you
to hear.
You're a New Yorker, but do you eat crabs?
Oh yeah, we had actually a seafood fest this weekend back in New York with my family. My family always loved crabs. We didn't do as much obey until I moved down here, but crabs are big.
Okay, all right. So what say you about the blue crab population? This seems to go up and down every couple of years.
Well, I know that we were reeling from COVID, so you didn't have as many workers
But that should increase the population, right? If you don't have as many people out fishing for them, is that what you're suggesting?
I'm suggesting that I think there's some harvesting that goes on with that. Again, I'm not into the blue crabs exactly crabbing, what can happen, but I believe there's some contribution and some feeding and some nurturing that goes into to make sure the population is taken care of, and we just haven't had the capacity of workers to actually do that over the last couple of years.
And I don't know how they measure this, but they said the overall crab population, while still below the long-term average, the estimated number of juvenile crabs increased from 101 million in 2022 to 116 million in 2023. But it's still well below average, as they say, for the fourth straight year. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we talk about the health of the bay, and I know there's still issues there, but I think we continue to make progress. I think we lost some progress when some funding got cut a couple of years back under the Trump administration. But from what I hear, we're still making progress on that. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, or maybe the crabs are just like humans right now. They know a recession is coming. You don't want to have more babies if you've got no recession
is coming. That's exactly right. Winter is coming. All right. Let's go to topic 2, the insanity of Maryland insanity plea. This is from the Maryland Reporter. Why is the murderer of 3 men not criminally responsible? And by the way, although this appeared in the Maryland Reporter, which is out of Annapolis, this particular story has to deal with the suspect that killed 3 workers in a Smithsburg, Maryland factory. And he has been found not criminally responsible for those actions due to schizophrenia, which was previously undiagnosed. What say you?
This is touchy. One, because we've seen this in how many movies, right? How many movies when there's an insanity plea that's actually used? There's no consistency, as from state to state, jurisdictions as well. If you got a strong enough case, lawyer, psychiatrist that could come in and make the case for you, there's a chance that you can honestly get away with murder. But on the other hand, we know that we are doing a horrible job of addressing mental health in this country. And we know that there's so many opportunities there. And we know there are a number of people who are suffering from mental health and to even these extremes where they can do harm to themselves or others. So I think it's until we really get a grasp on that, things like this are going to continue to be subjective.
Well, and I think the thing that you said, that I keyed in on, that you said, that I completely agree with, and I'm going to say it a little differently, but schizophrenia has been the diagnosis of exclusion. It is vaguely about someone who distorts reality or had hallucinations at the time a crime was committed. And there's from what I've read, it's very difficult to put teeth into that and put it in a nice, neat box in terms of diagnosing that. The other thing that's interesting that the article points out is that insanity is a legal, not medical term. Mm-hmm. And that surprised me at some point because I always think about, an insane asylum,
right,
or he's insane, she's insane, they're insane. But it's a legal term.
Right. And I think we blend the jargon and we tie it and make assumptions that it's tied to a medical term. But again, like you said, with schizophrenia, there's so many other, and bipolar, there's so many other mental health issues that we need to address that causes individuals that, again, I know that this is a focus on doing harm to others, but suicide rates are higher. Doing harm to oneself is also a consideration. So I just think that we need to turn more of a focus into the health aspect here, mental health, and then I think we can really focus more so on the law and the legal aspect of it.
So one of the interesting pieces of this, if you plead not criminally responsible and are found guilty, basically instead of going to jail, you're going to a potentially cushy mental health facility, and you could be released whenever the state finds that you are no longer insane.
It's the plot of Batman, right? The Arkham Asylum. That's exactly the plot of Batman. that all of the villains, instead of being imprisoned, they are deemed criminally insane and placed into Arkham. So again, it's something that has ingrained in our culture as well, something that we're aware of, and I think something that we gloss over and really don't understand the impact there.
As we look at this particular case, though, and if I were on the jury, one of the things that I would certainly take into consideration is, regardless of these defendants saying that they were incapacitated at the time of this, they knew enough to run away after they committed the crime, to run from the police.
But a lot of these, some of these mental health issues create hysteria and fear. So you're constantly running. It can be an attempt to stop someone and you run away. I just think that to understand someone's mental state, and probably outside of the ocean, the human brain is probably one of the miracles that we haven't really got tapped into 100% yet to really understand it. I think we have a basic understanding, and right now these juries rely on a psychiatrist to come in and inform them. Because we as individuals are not informed. And
depending on the defendant, they might afford a much better psychiatrist than the prosecution.
Absolutely.
Money
agree.
talks.
Yes.
Page 3. You're going to be surprised at this one. The National Rifle Association filed a lawsuit against the state of Maryland following the signing of a pair of gun control bills by Governor Wes Moore. The bills were those that limited where a firearm could be legally carried, and even by citizens with a concealed carry permit. And the NRA says, we're going to sue you. What say you?
This is another topic I think we broached a few weeks back as well, and said this is one of those national topics that you get attention for. We know that the gun laws in every state are hot topics right now and very divisive. And for the governor to come out, and we just talked about which ones he kind of just let pass and which one he stamped his name on. And this is one that he really stood for and stood behind, and made a national example of the state of Maryland. And of course, the NRA were just waiting to file suit.
You got $100 to bet. What are the odds that the bill will stand, that it'll be declared constitutional?
Oh, it's definitely going to stand.
Oh, you think it is?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It's definitely going to stand because the governor of the states. And again, one of the benefits of this country is that each state is governed by itself and has controls over its laws, but it's also one of the riskiest things about our country as well, and some of the extremes that some of the states are going to right now. So I think this would resonate across the country if this suit has any teeth.
Page 4, Maryland's Prescription Drug Affordability Board will create new draft regulations based on written comments they received from the public. That sounds, at some level, good. We're listening to our to our constituents and acting. I don't know how realistic it is.
I agree. I think in this article that we've read over, one of the things is it's the Maryland's Prescription Drug Affordability Board. And the biggest area of contention is the word affordability, but it's yet the name within the board.
Yeah.
And we see it in housing right now as well. What is affordable? And I think the biggest area of contention is the vagueness of that word and what affordable actually means. This is really taking on, the big bag wolf of the pharmaceutical companies as well. And we know with patents and generic drugs, it's been controversial for almost forever.
But there's also the notion, well, two notions. Number one, the second pill costs 5 cents to make. The first pill costs hundreds of millions of dollars. So they've got to recover their investment.
R&D.
And I realize there's more to that than just the cost of the medicine over the counter. But number two is that I don't think anybody would argue that insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies have lost their way in terms of being able to turn a profit at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So I think from my perspective, I think this is a good thing, but I don't know that I think that it's going to do a lot, because at the end of the day, if you cut the price, if you cause it to be too affordable, the pharmaceutical companies are going to stop their R&D.
Yeah, I don't think that we have the
This
power.
feels like feel-good legislation to me.
Exactly. We hear you. This is a complaint jar that you sit on the counter. We hear you. We heard you. We're talking it through. But is the state of Maryland going to take on pharmaceutical companies that provide medicine and drugs across the entire country? It's hard to say. It shows that we care and we understand it. But does it have any teeth to make any change?
Probably not. And it doesn't have any teeth, and we don't have any time for the topic 5, so we're just going to have to hold that one until next week. That's all the time we have tonight. We hope you will follow us on Facebook. We hope you will like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. We hope you will send your comments to feedback@theflipsidetv.com. That's feedback@theflipsidetv.com. Most importantly, join us next week when Reggie will be back, Terrence will be back, I'll be back, and maybe even a special guest for another episode of The Flip Side. Good night.